Hello and welcome to another episode of My Property World. I'm Will Mallard and I'm delighted to be joined by Paul Ribbons. Paul, great to have you on the show.
Thank you, Will. It's a pleasure coming back and I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, so we're going to be talking resilience, mental skills, mental health, and we're going to be talking about tough times. Paul, firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the loss of your daughter, Zoe. Really awful stuff. And you reached out and said that you felt that there was an opportunity to help others learn from your experiences in terms of how to look at the world and how to deal with the pain, loss, grief, and challenges, I suppose, the trauma, and to move forward and create, I suppose, a better mental health state and move forward towards success. So firstly, rest in peace, Zoe. I'm going to hand over to you now just to give a little bit of a background to yourself. You've been a prolific property trader, decades of experience, hundreds and hundreds of properties purchased, sold, and a font of knowledge, I suppose, in the world of property investment. But this is about what goes on in your head.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction. I've been in property games since 1986, 87, early 87. I was an estate agent for 10 years. I'm fortunate, and I say fortunate, and this is partly what we're talking about today, really, about resilience. I've got a condition called dyslexia, which really caused me difficulty learning when I was a kid. And I had the reading age of a 7-year-old when I left school. I didn't even know that until I got tested at 35. So anything administration was a nightmare for me. So my dad said to me when I was a kid, if you get into food, clothes or housing, you're never going to be skint. You'll always find a job. And I had a job in the bakery on a Saturday. And I thought, well, that's food. That'll do. And that was my career choice. So I was a baker for 8 years of my life. I realized that I was destined for better things. And I got to 23 years old and realized I'd lived longer than my mother had. She passed when I was 3. And I made a decision that day that my life wasn't going to be about mediocrity. I didn't want my life to be just average. So I made a decision there and then that I was going to change my life. I was going to do something. And so I managed to buy a flat at the time. And whilst I was buying the flat, I was watching the estate agents and what they were doing. And I've got a mantra. I've always had it. I would watch someone do something and think, oh, I can do that. And that's how I decided that my next career choice was, if he can do it, I can do it. And then when I sold the flat within 9 months, the guy who sold it, I said to him, how did you get into this game? And he said, he used to be a quick fit fitter. So I thought, great, they take anyone. And he said, no, you got to think about it. Anyway, long story short, I managed to get a job in an estate agents, and that was in March 1987, and I've not looked back since. I went through a pretty nasty divorce back in the early 90s, and we had, if anyone remembers property, we had base rates at 15%. I mean, everyone's bleating at about 3.5%, but they were 15%. And I was selling houses at the time, still selling houses. I was selling houses successfully as well. But the divorce caused me to consider my kids. I wanted to spend more time with them. And people see estate agents, and I get a lot of people slagging them off. They work fucking hard. They really do.
Nights, weekends, all of that.
I was flat out, and because it was recession time, you had to work doubly hard, especially if you wanted to be successful. And there was a lot of lads that came and went in that industry because they weren't good enough. They didn't have that resilience to succeed in a tough market. And then by 96, I had issues with having my kids. My boss was saying you can't have weekends off and stuff like that. And I wanted my kids at the weekends because I was, separated from them. So I made that decision that I wanted to spend more time with my kids. So I went self-employed. And from that moment onwards, I was finding deals. I mean, I hear people talking about being deal sourcers and using other people's money. I just teamed up with a few developers and said, what do you want? They went, this type. Okay, I'll find them for you. You give me a fee. And that's how I started off. And one of them went, look, you need to team up 50-50. So that's how I started off. There is a story I'm not going to go into today, how I got into trading, but I've been trading properties since 1997.
So maybe just briefly outline what a property trade is.
Straightforward. I like simplicity. I love simplicity. I don't like complicating my life. I like massive income, not passive income. So what I tend to do is I find something that needs modernization, looks a bit crappy. If I can buy it at the right price, which is one of my fortes, I then stick it in auction as is without doing anything to it. I might even mess it up a little bit on the outside to make it look a bit shabbier. I might bald it up or something, considered something like that. Because when you look for an auction catalogue, are you looking for lovely houses or are you looking for shitty ones? Because if you see a house that's all nice, you don't look at that and think, I can add value to that. But if you see one that's boarded up, you think, oh, I could do something with that. I can add value to it. So it's such psychological, because this business is all about psychology. And I just stick it in an auction. And I know full well that more than one person is probably going to go to that auction, whether it's online today or as it used to be physical, and they can't help themselves. And you see it on eBay. You only have to look at eBay on something that needs to be valuable, and it will probably sell for the same money as something new. And it's the same with a house. We get retail money for something that's normally done up for a house that needs modernization, and people go, I don't understand it. And also, it's a great barometer to the marketplace, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. And I've probably been involved in getting close to 1,000 deals now since 1997. Well, certainly 96 to 90. I've been involved at least 900, coming up for 1,000 deals. And that's whether I've traded them myself with my business partner, or I've been involved and passed it on to someone and just took a fee for it. Because if something's a bit tight, I don't disregard it, because I believe you never go making a profit. So if I can trade something to another trader without exchanging it and just say, look, give me $5,000 for it, or give me $2,000 or whatever, then I'll do that. I mean, I've done deals where I've nick 500 quid, which doesn't sound a lot when you're dealing with big numbers, but £500, I'll get excited about that. 500 quid, nicking a 500 quid deal. So, but that's my background. I still do it now, even in this uncertain time as we are, with interest rates rising. There's still a market out there for houses that need modernisation, because there's a lot of people chasing, and I understand supply and demand.
And it's incredible when you think about it. Like, so you're in your mid-30s at this point in the story. You've gone through the loss of your mother. You've gone through, I suppose, not having a great experience schooling-wise. Mm-hmm. You've gone through. You've got married, and then you've got divorced, and there's kids, and you've changed careers twice, and you've gone self-employed. Lots going on.
Yeah, it's funny. Also, both times I went when I changed careers, at both points, I'd just taken out a new mortgage. So when I changed the last time around, I just bought a house so I could take my kids there. Before that, when I became an estate agent, I just bought a house and got a big mortgage. So I take big risks sometimes. But the interesting thing here is what I've skipped over is when my mother passed away. My grandmother looked after us for a short period, and my dad remarried. And my stepmother was not particularly nice person, and we were treated very poorly. She had her son, which was my half brother. He got everything he ever wanted, and we were treated like Cinderellas, me and my sisters. And so we had not only dyslexia to deal with, I had the poor environment. Today, she would have definitely been probably prosecuted for certainly emotional cruelty as well as physical cruelty. So I had that to deal with. I've also experienced bankruptcy as well in my career. Back in 2009, I went bankrupt. My wife got throat cancer. Took me right off piste. Didn't pay any attention. And the thing with when you're trading, you've got big tax bills, and I ignored a tax bill. And because of my wife dealing with her cancer, and that came along to bite me on the backside just as we went into the recession of 2008. And that 2008 recession caused me a big problem. And before you know it, it was. Are you still there, Will? Because it looks like you're.
Yeah, I am.
Yeah.
The video is frozen for some reason, but keep going, Paul. Yeah.
So I had to deal with the bankruptcy as well during that period, and it was quite interesting because within 18 months of being declared bankrupt, I remember speaking to the bank manager, and he went to me, "How could you recover so quickly?" And I said, "Well, it wasn't my skills that caused me a problem. It was just bad management at the time because of some things that had happened." Because I make it look fairly easy on my life, but there have been periods where I've not responded in the right way. And that comes down to dyslexia, that comes down to some remnants of my past that sometimes catches up with me. And it's knowing how to deal with them that makes the difference, I suppose.
And in terms of how you see the world, your understanding of that, I think, has been dramatically enhanced as you've gone through these experiences.
I'm a glass half full type of guy, and I don't see any of these things as anything to hold me back. Because I said earlier, I've got a mantra: is I look at someone doing something and think I can do that. I don't need to know how many wives Henry VIII had to sell houses. So education to me is futile if it's not being utilized in the correct manner. I.e., is it going to enhance my life? So I'll give a classic example. Back in 2011, I wrote a report about the property market, and I stated in that report in 2011 that house prices were going to double in 2 to 5 years. Everyone thought I was bonkers. I mean, it was a bold statement to make, considering we were still sort of like bouncing on the bottom in the recession from the remnants of the financial crisis in 2008. But I could see what was going to be going on in life, i.e. interest rates had come down, banks were being refinanced, refunded by the Bank of England. There was a lot of cheap money around. There was encouragement for governments to lend. You don't just dump interest rates down to 0.5% if you don't want assets to rise in value, because they knew if assets rose in value, then people would feel wealthier. What do they do when they feel wealthier? They spend money. So we could predict what's going to go on. But my attitude towards it is through the flames of adversity, if you go for a forest fire after it's been ripped through, wherever it goes, within a couple of months you've got new growth, and that clearance enables the new growth to come back, and it doesn't last very long. The charring, the heat, once it dies down and dissipates, new growth comes. And every recession is like that. Everything in life, something happens. It'll either you can either do one of two things. You can either define you in a way where it's negative, or it can define you in a way it's positive. So in my life, my mother passed away. I look for the positive in that. How can you find positivity in a 3-year-old that's lost its mum?
And I've got to say that your call to me a month or so back, only a few short months after the loss of your daughter Zoe, that would be one of the most incredible examples of, I don't know if renewal's the right word, but the resilience to actually pick up the phone and say, I want to get on and talk about this. I think I've got some value. There's some good coming out of what could only be described as a nightmare. I can't imagine anything worse than losing a child.
No. Well, that immediately I'll run through really the events.
Take your time, mate.
Yeah. The events. We lost her on the 3rd of October, 2022. I apologise if I don't look at the camera.
You're okay, mate.
And I was very fortunate in that she took her life in a way where she was very meticulous about it. She knew how she wanted. It's the closest you could never get. I'm not going to describe how she did it because, you know, if anyone's listening and they're in that place, it could give them ideas. I don't want to do that. But this is the closest you could have got to the euthanasia. She went peacefully. She left letters, photographs, music, Spotify lists, and a detailed explanation for the emergency services, what to expect. She was very thoughtful, very considerate, even though, you know, she was about to wreck a lot of lives, including her own. But within the first week, to start with, I was blaming myself because I let her go home from here, and she convinced me she was okay. And what people don't realise is I've had 10 years of this with Zoe. Zoe's transgender. I'll say was, she's now gone, but she was transgender. She was 6'6", and she went from Harry to Zoe. And that's, you know, she said to me, Dad, if I could choose not to do this, 6'6", I would do that. You know, it's not something that I've got a choice in the matter, really. And so we had a lot of years where we had to deal with her transition, which is fraught with mental health issues because you're dealing with, you know, a lot of people who don't understand staring, and she had attempted to take her life, although they were quite feeble attempts in the past, but 2 or 3 times, self-harmed. And we had bouts of depression and over a 10-year period, and she was bipolar, which didn't help. And we had to deal with that, you know, and that was along with living your life. And not many people knew that, even when I was out and about. And that's one of the reasons why I probably stopped doing the training, because I needed to spend more time with Zoe and making sure that I was available. Because, you know, I used to get calls when I was on a talk in Liverpool, you know, and it's not easy to get back from Liverpool. So there was a conscious decision to not continue doing the talks back in 2013, 14 and 15. And so we had this to deal with. And then when she took her own life, I knew why. I had that to cling to, because a lot of people, when they find themselves in a situation when someone's taking their own life, they don't know why they've done it. They haven't got a detailed explanation. They haven't got letters. They haven't got that preparation. And I was fortunate, and I was looking for something in her passing that I could cling to and say, it could have been worse, if that makes sense. Could have been worse. So that's my default setting, is to find something that I can take from it. And there is, in her letter, there is one line which I repeat to myself on a regular basis. If anyone can take a shit situation and turn it into something worth fighting for, that's my dad. And she
wrote that to you in the letter.
In my letter, a 6-page letter I've got from her. Actually, I've got a detailed explanation of how she felt about her dad, and it's wonderful. I promise you, it's absolutely heartbreaking to read. I read it every single day. Some days more than a lot more than that, and it's helped me because not many parents get to know exactly how their kids feel about them. You know, I've always said to my kids, I love you. And they always say, I love you too. They never say, Dad, I love you, normally up front. It's that it's prompted usually. But I knew exactly. She said that she couldn't ask for a better father, friend, and mentor. I'd saved her life on multiple occasions. So all these things that she wrote, I clung to them because there was something positive that I could take from that. And it wasn't just in vain. And then, but prior to her passing, we spoke because we tried to get her in a better place, and I thought I had. And we talked about doing stuff like podcasts or YouTube videos on which she wanted to help the trans community, because there's a huge amount. I mean, you're 20 times more likely to want to take your own life as a trans person as opposed to someone, they call them cis. I don't know what cis stands for, but that's a normal person. 20 times more likely. And it gets worse than that, because post-surgery, so she had her surgery in 2018, post-surgery, it's even higher, because sometimes the surgery goes wrong. That's one of the reasons why Zoe's not with us, is because her surgery went wrong and she couldn't live with that. And so it's finding something meaningful in her passing. And that's where I come from on everything that happens. So I go back to my mother. You know, I worked out that when I lost her, it enabled me to be independent. Today, I don't need unconditional love from people. I don't need adulation. I don't need to be liked or wanted, because effectively the apron streams got cut all them years ago. So it's finding something, wherever it is. And trust me, it ain't much worse than losing your kid. I thought it was losing my mum. You know, I used to look at everything and think it can't be as bad as that. And this is a different reference point. Go on, you was going to say something. Sorry.
No, go on.
So it's just trying to find something that you can cling to, and that means more than what's just happened.
And one of the things that you offline you've spoken about with me in a bit of detail is how you think about the past, the present, and the future, and the ability to control that to an extent, or be aware of it. Do you want to just explain a little bit about that? Because I think it's a fascinating thing that goes on in all of our heads all of the time, and trauma or horrific events like this, you know, are obviously enormously challenging, but it creates an awareness about how to look at the world, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, it's two things that come up as you were saying that. Was any traumatic event, I equate it like a bomb going off. So if you can imagine a bomb going off, that's usually there's a shock wave, and that shock wave is usually 360 degrees from the point of the explosion. So the trauma happens and it spreads out into your future, affects your present, and it affects your past, because that's what trauma is like. It's like 360 degrees, because what I didn't expect from Zoe's passing was how it brought up past issues, and it brought the grieving of my mother right to the forefront. So I was grieving two people because I was too young to grieve, and when I was old enough to understand it, I was told that I couldn't speak about my mother in the same way I wanted to. I was told I had to call her Pam rather than Mum. So that came up. So any trauma can cause all sorts of issues, whether they're current or in the future, because they can alter the way you see life. My mother's passing gave me a very different view on life. one where I wasn't dependent on her, and decisions I made from that traumatic event affect me today. Decisions I make today. I went through a big trust issue for many years. I didn't trust because I couldn't trust my mother because she died, even though this subconsciously, it doesn't make any sense to say I don't trust her because she died, right? Because she left me, right? So it was abandonment. And then my grandmother handed me over to my dad and my stepmother, and effectively she abandoned me. And even though, you know, my dad's got the right to have his children who are living with him. And then my stepmother, who I expected to treat us well, let us down. So she effectively she couldn't be trusted. My sister, when she was older, and she was 16, 17, buzzed off to New Zealand and left me. And I was really close to my oldest sister. And so I had this view of life that people let you down. And it had an effect on everything. And I had to deal with that, you know, years and years later. But at the same time, it enabled me to be very strong as an individual. So I dealt with things without the need for your approval. I really don't mind what people think of me. Really don't mind. It doesn't worry me. It's your business. Had I grown up in a very nurtured environment and, you know, and had that safety net, I see a lot of people who grew up with that who are very concerned about what other people think of them. And that is debilitating because it affects decisions that you will make. So it's understanding that when something happens, it's that you can utilize it to your advantage, or it can be to your disadvantage. It's up to you to make that choice. There's a fork in the road, all right? It's that way or that way. You know, and I do remember, I mean, I through that adversity, there was an entrepreneurial spirit that came about from being treated poorly as a child and not having that nurturing environment. And I'm going to admit this, and I'm not proud of it, but there is part of me that understands that it has developed who I am as an individual. But I got to the stage where my brother could have anything he wanted within reason, and we weren't allowed it. And we're talking about toys, we're talking about, you know, treats. Right? I wasn't allowed sweets, cakes, biscuits, ice cream and stuff. My brother had everything he wanted. And I used to have to go down and buy an ice cream for my brother, give it to him. I couldn't have one. I mean, how cruel is that? And I was only like 10. And you think, well, hang on a second, this is not fair, you know. So what do you do? So I worked out quite quickly that if I got money, then I can buy what I wanted, and she couldn't stop me. So that sparked something in me then to start acquiring things that I shouldn't, in a way I shouldn't. In other words, I'd steal it. I'd find some way to get money out of somebody, and because I wanted to buy the things I was being denied as a child. And them skills honed themselves into a point where if you wanted something, you'd ask me for it and I'd go and get it for you, and you wouldn't ask questions where it came from. Now, I wouldn't steal from someone's house. I might steal from a shop or from a business, but I wouldn't steal from someone individually. So I see that now as an entrepreneurial spirit. It was something that I did through necessity to start with. And then one particular day I got caught, and I was getting on for 16, and I'd I'd been banged to rights, and I'd left home at 16. I was living in digs with some other fellas, and they were wrongers as well. But I had, if I can say I had morals as a thief, right? I did have morals. I wouldn't steal off anyone individually, but my mate, the lads I lived with didn't care. And they used to nick the old Ford stereos out of the cars. And there was a big pile of them underneath the stair cupboard. So when the police came round my house, I was living in one of the rooms. They did the search of the house and they found all these stereos. And the first thing they're doing is saying, well, hang on a second, we've got these stereos. Well, because I didn't participate in them, none of my fingerprints were on them, so they couldn't pin that to me. And they realized that, mine was petty, mine was minor. But I'd stole even, I got caught. And the copper said to me, look, it's really straightforward. You can go down that path as you are. And I can tell you now, you'll develop you're very articulate, you're very switched on. And coppers know if they've got a wrong on or someone who's just been misguided, because most of the lads,
circumstance
it's their attitudes, your attitudes. I was quite pleasant to the copper. I wasn't being awkward with him, and like I was lying my teeth out trying to not get nicked, but I was he could tell, I didn't have a chip on my shoulder, I didn't have an attitude. And he said, look, you've got two choices. You can go down that route, and trust me, you're intelligent enough to probably develop into, and I was nicking to order in a way even then. And he said, or you can go down that path, and that's the straight now, because that path leads to prison, and that leads to a good life. And that good Samaritan enabled me to realize that I had entrepreneurial spirit. It was just guided in the wrong way. I had that entrepreneurial, and it shows up in what I do today. I mean, I'm very entrepreneurial, but I was just misguided, and that moment
you changed business model, so to speak.
Definitely, I had to. Otherwise, I would have, and it would have got. I'm not proud of it, but there was an element of I knew that it would have been cars next, and it would have been, and mates of mine were doing it. They were literally nicking cars and driving them down to Harwich and just dropping them up for the docks. I mean, it happens today as well. And they would nick a car to order. They'd say, we want this type of car, and they'd come. And this is back in the early 1980s. No, in the late 70s. Yeah, that's early 1980s. And anything that was considered nickable would be taken somewhere, and it'd be stripped, or it would go on a boat somewhere. And I would have gone down that route if it hadn't have been for that copper.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And these decisions, these choices about paths that you can go down. But what's the question, do you think, that people need to ask themselves at these junction points, particularly when they're in a challenging situation, or they've gone through a traumatic event?
With Zoe, it's what is this going to stand for? That's the question I ask. What's this going to stand for? Is this going to be just and I saw it. I went to a meeting for survivors of bereaved suicide, and these people are. The whole thing defines them. The whole their loved one who's gone, it's defined them. Whether I've given you an outline of what Zoe's life was like. That's not going to define me. That's not going to define me as a person. That, oh, my daughter died and I'm going to talk about that for the rest of my life. It's going to mean something, and that meaning being that mantra effect, that thing she wrote. If anyone can turn a shit situation and turn it into something worth fighting for, it's my dad. Now, as you know, I've coached before, and I'm actually a trained life coach and an NLP practitioner. And so I take clients, and that mantra now is going to go into my clients and say, look, you've got a shit situation, let's turn it into something worth fighting for. So that's what it's going to, Zoe's passing is going to mean something in the future for that. So when something happens, bankruptcy, for example, is this going to be the end or the beginning? Is this going to be the rising of the phoenix out of the flames? Is this going to define the rest of my life? No, it's an experience. It happened. I can't do nothing about it. It's done now. Move on. Let's find something positive in this. And that's everything that's happened, every single thing from divorce through to even my wife's cancer. You know, I remember when my, she had throat cancer, and it could have been so much worse, because she could have lost her voice box, she could have lost her, and you'd never know, all these years later, 15, I don't know, how many years later, it's 12, 15 years later, you'd never know she had cancer. But the decision was, okay, so how can we make this work for us? Is it going to change our lives for the better or for the worse? What can we take from this? And I think it's having that glass half full enables me to do that, enables me to see that there's something here that I can take from this. So I've got a saying, which is, through adversity comes positivity. You just have to find what that positivity is. And there's another saying that I nicked from Tony Robbins. If you know who Tony Robbins is, the quality of your life is in direct proportion to your ability to deal with bad news and adversity. Because if you can't deal with them, if you can't make them work for you, they're going to pull you down. And there's nothing that's going to pull me down. Nothing. I'm in control of my life, not the circumstances I find myself in. So I haven't got a deck of playing cards, but I'm not responsible for the hand I've been dealt. But I am responsible for how I play that hand. And I've always had that view of life. It's my responsibility to make something count. It's my responsibility to, and if you think of the word responsibility, I read a book by a guy called Wayne Dyer. And if anyone's not heard of Wayne Dyer, get some of his books. He's passed away now, but he's a great psychologist. I was about to say something about
when
playing cards. You're not responsible for the hand. Oh, responsibility. That's right. He breaks the word responsibility down into response ability, your ability to respond. If you think about it, because I used to think that responsibility was a bad thing. Oh, I've got to be responsible. No, it's your ability to respond. And you can react if you want, which is a fight and flight mode. And, there's a gap between stimulus and response. And that gap is the important part. Now, that gap could be quite a big gap. So when Zoe passed, it was a big gap. Trust me, I didn't do anything for months, really. I enabled myself to grieve. But sometimes that gap can be short, but make sure you don't react. Make sure you respond with a bit, using your ability, because it's that ability to respond that's important. It's knowing that you're in control with how you respond. You don't have to.
And these mental skills, these questions, and I suppose methodologies of how you deal with not just adversity, but challenges in your life generally. What would be the 3 or 4 key tips that you would have for someone out there listening who is struggling a little bit with whatever's in front of them? It could be to do with their career, it could be to do with their family, it could be to do with something else. But what would be the core sort of principles as far as resilience goes?
The first one I would say is that whatever happens, whether it's losing your daughter, whether it's your daughter coming out and saying I'm transgender, whether it's bankruptcy with cancer, whether it's divorce, whether it's somebody else treating you poorly, whether it's again loss, that doesn't matter what it is. Is acceptance. It's accepting of what's going on. So when Zoe came to me and said, I'm a woman trapped in a man's body, I want you to call me Zoe from now on. And I've had my son for 19 years, and trust me, that's difficult because I've always known her as Harry, and now she's Zoe. But it's acceptance. It's accepting what's in front of you. I can't change it. I can try and influence Zoe if I think it's the wrong decision, or we spoke about it at quite a long length. Excuse me. But once you accept what's in front of you, I think the next question is, what does this mean? What does this mean? What does this mean to me? What does it mean to the people around me? And then trying to find and make sense of what's going on. Because there is a if it's happening to me, then I can do something about it. If it's happening to somebody else, sometimes you have to suspend your considerations, i.e., whether I agreed with my daughter changing her gender was irrelevant. Right. What was more important was accepting Zoe as she turned up, giving her unconditional love, and suspending my thoughts and feelings on that, because there's nothing I can do about that. There's nothing. She's the one that's going through it, not me. I have to manage how or what happens in front of me, and if I'm too consumed with my own self-indulgence, and I say this because I see it with other parents of trans kids. Oh, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. I don't know. I want to try and talk them out of it. And, they're making a mistake, and I think this and I think that. Well, they're in what I call I mode, and I mode's really important to get out of, because you see it in life today. People are walking around in I mode. They're about them, not about the other people. Because you've heard me talk about this in previous podcasts, right? Whether we're dealing with estate agents or auctioneers or punters buying properties, it doesn't matter what it is I never put myself in my mode. I'm okay. So what it's like for the other people? What's it like for if you can put yourself in somebody else's shoes, you've got a greater understanding of how to deal with it. So if you're stuck in I mode, the only person or the only view you're going to have is your view of the world. And that's built up with different experiences and things you've read and learned and skills you have. It's one-dimensional, really. But if you're coming out of yourself and look at it from other people's perspective, it's multi-dimensional, and it enables you to be able to say, okay, I'm not going to let my I'm just trying to think of the word, prejudices affect this scenario that's happening to somebody else. Because even though Zoe's changing genders, I could have made it about me. Oh, my daughter's changing gender. Oh no, I don't know what I'm going to do about it. And I've tried this and I've tried that. And I've been to this group. No, that's not going to help Zoe, is it? It's not going to help Zoe. And so the next stage is also is get the right, correct information. So it's accepting what's going on, and then what does this mean? And get out of I mode, and try and see it from a
a wider perspective.
Wider perspective, yeah. And then do your research. And I give you a classic example of that. COVID came along, didn't it? And I do remember doing massive research on COVID before it hit our shores in the January, after I'd seen it hit Wuhan. They were World Health Organization had come out and said, we're concerned about this virus. And everyone goes, oh, it's only a virus, split flu, So I started doing research, and this is really important. If you're going to get information, make sure the information, one, is relevant, and two, is coming from a credible source. Because I hear people saying, yeah, I saw it on the internet. Okay, really? So who wrote it? Barry from Bushy put it on Facebook. Oh, really? All right. So what's his qualification then? Well, he knows what he's talking. Does he really? He knows what he's talking. Is he a scientist? Is he a virologist? Is he has he got the correct credentials? Is he with transgender? Is he a surgeon? Because people get their information and they take whatever they read as read. That's it. It's on the internet, isn't it? No. When I did when I searched virology, I was looking at places like Harvard, Harvard Medical, so I knew it was coming from a credible source. I was doing the research on the Spanish flu and how that affected the world. And again, the source, it's important. When was it written? If you have the information that was written about a strategy that you're involved with property and it's all gone wrong, and you start looking back to 1986 and what happened in the laws were different, the regulations were different than they are today. So get the relevant information, and then you can make informed decisions. And that's the next thing. Decision on what you're going to do about this. How's this going to define you? There's everything in life you do. Every single thing is a choice. And people find that difficult. And I'll give you an example of that. I had a friend of mine who was complaining and bleating on about going to work. I've got to go to work. I'm moaning about it. I said, you haven't got to go to work. He went, well, of course I have. And I said, well, you don't have to go. Well, I've got to. I've got no choice. I said, you have got a choice. So he couldn't grasp this concept. And I said, okay, let me explain something. Let's just say, for instance, today you chose not to go to work. What would happen? He went, well, I'd probably get sick pay. I'd have to tell them, but all the stuff's not going to be done. I said, well, just make that choice that you don't go in today. And who's going to do it? Someone else will do it. Okay, so what happens then? The next day, you don't want to go in, right? You choose not to go in. Well, they won't pay me then. So that's the choice. You're going in because you want to be paid. The choice is I choose to go to work to get the money so I can live, and I'm not going to get kicked out on the street. So it's whether you can live with the consequences of the choice that you're making. So the choice is to sit at home, not do anything. The consequences are I don't pay my mortgage. I get thrown out. Me and the kids are on the street. That's the consequences of the choices of not going to work. The choices of the consequences of going to work are I can pay the bills. I can buy my kids presents. We can go on holiday. We can live a good life. So there's the choice. When you realize that everything is a choice, you choose to do it, it makes everything different because you're doing it because you want to do it, not because you're going in. And then that moment, it clicked in his mind. He went in and all his relationships with the people that he worked with changed. Not because they'd changed, he'd changed. He changed his representation of what it meant to go in because I want to, and I want to earn some money. And I said to him, you can choose to change your job if you wish. That's another choice. Different choices within life, but everything is a choice. Does that make sense to you, Rob?
Absolutely. Now, we're running out of time, Paul. I believe we've both got other appointments to be going on to, but absolutely fantastic stuff. You've opened your heart, your soul, all the years of experiences, out in the space of less than an hour. I really appreciate it.
Welcome.
So we'll be continuing the series on resilience. Mm-hmm. Paul Ribbons, if someone wants to look you up, it's paul@paulribbons.com for
an email. Email address is there. They can connect with me on Facebook. If they go on my Facebook, I've got a group, the Paul Ribbons group. They can connect with me on Instagram _ Paul Ribbons. I'm starting to come out into the world of social media. I kept very quiet for a long time. So I'm now starting to, and I know I will be doing quite a lot of these sort of podcasts and stuff like that in the future. I've got a YouTube channel, Paul Ribbons, as well, which they can subscribe to, which we will be releasing. Hopefully, this one we'll stick on YouTube as well as
a couple of people that I would respect highly in property, and probably the key people that have guided me in my early stages. Mm-hmm. They all say words to the effect that I would sit at Paul Ribbons' feet to listen to him. So anyone who's interested in finding out more, get hold of Paul. Paul, just a big hug, mate.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I don't have words, really. It's
and I'd like to say as well, when I reached out to you, thank you for your support, your individual support. I mean, it was, and when I approached you about this resilience series, you jumped all over it, and you realised that there's value in this, and I think, and that's what Zoe's life was about. What I didn't say earlier is that she did, even the night she passed, she was helping some other kids go through their transition. She was guiding people to let them know this is what to expect, stuff like that. She helped greatly in her own community, and I want to do it in mine. And I know people do have problems with adversity and trauma and loss and it doesn't have to be. And there's another one thing I'm going to leave you with, actually. And when it happens with Zoe or Mum, it's difficult to put this into context. But in everyday life, I always compare it to something else. It could always be a lot worse. There's always someone worse off than me. It could be so much worse, as opposed to this couldn't get any worse. There's a, if you compare to, I remember having a conversation once with someone who was bleating on about their problem, and a friend of mine's sister had died, and on the day of her shiva, they were singing happy birthday to her daughter, and I said, what was your problem again? Because sometimes we have to put it into perspective. And the perspective is, actually, it's not this bad. It's not as bad as you think it is. There's someone worse off. There's something. There's a solution to this, or I can get through this.
Mighty stuff. I'm Will Mallard. This is My Property World podcast. Paul Ribbons, thank you.
Thank you very much.